Greetings all. Today, we are going to discuss the manifolds of the brain and mind. We will cover the theory of manifolds, what they are, how to access them, how they work, their relationship to free will, and how they are one of the most advanced forms of planning, contemplation, and perception at our disposal. What is my definition of a manifold of the brain? Loosely, a manifold is a constellation of interconnected neurons and regions of the brain, which, when activated, inform the mind on a subject. The information produced by activating the manifold can passively create a subconscious seed thought or conscious free will thoughts that build onto the seed thought. These neurons can be mapped and then modeled in 3D simulations, which provide a geometric shape of the subject. This can be done over time, such as a rat running a maze, which produces a geometric shape or manifold of connectivity within the rat's brain. Not the shape of the maze itself, but of how the maze is represented and stored within the brain. Therefore, the geometric shape of the brain manifold is not a one-to-one representation of what we take in through our senses, but instead how and where it is stored in the brain. What is my definition of a manifold of the mind? Mental manifolds are the subconscious and conscious maps of internal and external phenomena and matter, etc. Manifolds can be singular in object data, such as one apple in one instance of spacetime. However, manifolds are more often enmeshed and co-associated with other manifolds. Think of it as a Venn diagram, having thousands of circles and overlapping meanings, all surrounding one word. Therefore, the entire subject of the word apple contains all instances of apple in any memory, genre, subject, or abstract thought. In this way, manifolds cross and bend categories of language, sensory data, categories, associations, etc. This means that there is what I call a master manifold of the subject of apple in the brain and mind. Apple equals fruit, company, seed, skin, ice, sauce, tart, sweet, crisp, harvest, orchard, cider. The list goes on. This is self-evident if you asked 100 people, what do you think of when I say apple, or similar prompts? The diversity of responses will show you master manifolds in real-world usage. Now, let's talk about how manifolds are used to satisfy the hierarchy of needs. When someone is consciously or unconsciously trying to acquire all the aspects of the hierarchy of needs, they are utilizing the most practical, dependable, and expedient manifolds in their mind. If your task is simple, then tool selection is simple. A Phillips screw requires a Phillips screwdriver or a drill with a Phillips bit. Easy peasy. However, when we make more extended plans toward more complicated goals, we might need to call upon more complicated esoteric manifolds. Looking at the second slide here, we can see an abstract representation of this process. I did not create this image, so please ignore any distracting parts that do not match my explanation. So, we have a human interacting with their world. The most immediate needs, the triage needs, if you will, are the largest part of this person's hierarchy of needs. Food, water, then clothing, shelter, etc. Throw in a job, some hobbies, and Bob's your uncle. But notice the needs coming to an apex in the person's mind. After you have satisfied all your more basic needs and have enough love and community in your life, that is the moment when most people move on to the meta needs. These higher needs could be thought of as using meta thought or thinking about thinking to explore the mind itself and the mysteries of life and the universe. This usually leads to searching for life-changing events, meta experiences, meaning beyond the mundane, if you will. To avoid getting too far into the weeds, let's just say that meta needs can be satisfied by meta experiences, such as mystical experiences, religious experiences, drug and entheogen use, travel, deeply personal music, poetry and prose, aha moments, the birth of a child, death of loved ones, rock bottoms or comebacks. Moments that move the soul, and thus memories that we keep coming back to, mulling over, reflecting on. It is true that many meta experiences are not a choice and are just accumulated in the course of a lifetime. But it is more likely you will find an experience meta if you intend to seek it out. Meta experiences are more impactful, influential, and likely to create more complex meta thought manifolds. It might be that they shift the shape and relationship of submanifolds in the brain, due to revelations that recategorize words, language, subjects, objects, etc. And when we engage in meta-thought, we are thinking of thinking and therefore are mentally present and more emergent in the wavefront of time. In this scenario, the wavefront of time is the smallest perceptible moment. Let's just say it is measured in seconds, although the actual increment is smaller than Planck's scale. More about that later in the video about balance or the ledger of the universe. But thinking from this vantage point, we are more capable of planning and considering beyond the wavefront of time. If this relates to goals, then it is different than just casually thinking or planning for the future. This is using free will to either promise yourself you will reach your goal or at least give it your all. If meta thought relates to concepts or issue or problems or koans, philosophy, etc., it means using all your faculties in an honest, objective manner to consider the subject. Again, this is different than just asking a casual or emotional or ignorant question and then giving up or moving on. This is working through thoughts in true grit fashion. Manifold thought. The next layer, above or beyond meta thought, is manifold thought. This might sound like a semantic thought, turducken, but stay with me, all right? So, if meta thought is thinking of thinking, then manifold thought is meta thought plus simultaneous intentional conscious manipulation of the data in your master manifolds and submanifolds. An easy way to visualize it is to imagine you are a genius stockbroker, just like the scene in Limitless when Bradley Cooper, playing Eddie Mora, is reviewing stocks and explains to his coworker why he bought a seemingly crappy stock. Basically, Eddie had considered the individual stock aka, the subject of his thought with all the usual manifolds and metrics of a typical stock analysis. But then he dipped into his master manifolds and submanifolds after thinking something like, what am I missing? What else beyond the obvious will affect this stock price? What is interconnected to the actual or perceived value of this company? His coworker asked why he was buying it, as the CEO had just been indicted. He replies, but not for the big fat defense contract he bribed his way into. That's still on and should be announced next week. To reach this conclusion, Eddie had considered other, more obscure manifolds. Then he used them to find data that could be used to analyze the subject, in this case, the stock, in more interconnected, complex ways. In addition to providing more complexity of analysis, most meta and manifold thoughts deal with aspects of time, past, present, and future, either separately or simultaneously. So they allow us to remain mentally moored or anchored in the wavefront of time, yet move beyond it and even consider all time or infinity. Now we can move on to the highest form of thought, imagination. I think imagination gets a bad rap these days. Maybe it is because anything can happen there. Even things that are taboo, forbidden, illegal, immoral, etc. Maybe it is because dreams live there, and it is easy for bullies, curmudgeons, and killjoys to smother dreams for fun and profit. Okay, well, also sometimes by accident, ignorance, casual banter, or good intentions. But imagination does not have to be a headspace that is poo-pooed for being unproductive or counterfactual, or perceived as a lazy, impractical pastime, or worse, a waste of time entirely. So, let's look at it practically and create some realistic arguments to push back against naysayers. Firstly, as I will describe in other videos, the complexity of life supplies the substrate of our brains, and complex brains allow more complex minds, or consciousness, if you will. So, just by using meta-thought, manifold thought, or imagination, you are increasing your conscious mind's ability to think, problem solve, multitask, and be productive. If we look at our diagram, we can see it as a feedback loop. Satisfying meta needs produces meta thought, which is focused on the entire pyramid of the hierarchy of needs. Expanding into manifold thought adds more complexity, reinforcing the ability and skill to examine your life and the universe. Secondly, if all of that is true, then our more complex, interconnected, expansive mind and thought process should not be bound by anything if our goal is to consider any and all possibilities or impossibilites to further the complexity of our conscious mind. Additionally, it is imagination or visualization that is the paint and paintbrush, the CGI of the mind's eye. Yes, we call upon stored manifolds to plan each step of free will, from the second question to the desired end state. But just like the holodeck in Star Trek, we need to see it somehow in order to identify any risks, contingencies, material properties, engineering, roadblocks, and smaller mile markers on the way. All of that is pure imagination, even if we write it down or draw it, etc., because it hasn't happened yet. If I hold an orange with one hand and describe or draw it falling to the floor before I drop it, it is still imagination until I let it drop. Even factual, precise cause and effect can be imagined before it happens. This is how science works. You have a hypothesis and you test it. But you probably have a pretty good anticipated outcome when you do, especially if you are being funded to do so. It is imagined, but not necessarily guaranteed, if the outcome could have many probable end states. Imagination is the master key at the end of the thought ladder. And by the practice of meta-thought, manifold thought, and imagination, and comparing and contrasting our higher thoughts to the Newtonian, boots-on-the-ground physicality of our day-to-day lives, we can enrich and refine both our minds and bodies. And if you consider humans to have an intangible, singular essence, then our spirits as well. Now that we have defined and discussed our terms, I would like to talk about where the manifolds of your mind are stored. I call this the manifold bulk. The manifold bulk is all the current and future manifolds in your subconscious brain and mind. If complexity produces consciousness exponentially, and consciousness leads to non-native, non-fate states, then the more complex the manifold, the farther from your native state you can become. In a sense, the complexity and expansiveness of your consciousness is dependent on the complexity and expansiveness of the manifolds in your brain and mind. Manifolds, composed of memories, sensory stimuli, trauma, emotions, dates and times, seasons, etc., are all stored in the subconscious mind. Think of it, if you will, as the training data for an AI system. AI are sometimes trained on all of the internets, or what is referred to as the common crawl. Now, I feel we must assume that AI and eventually a GI do, and will use manifolds to create associations and apply predictive probability. In the same way, we subconsciously and consciously draw upon our training data or master and submanifolds to predict, think, and consider. So, if complexity and thought can predict and plan and think and consider, it follows that the depth and breadth diverseness of that training data or manifold bulk will allow even more complex feedback loops. This means that in our practical, day-to-day, Newtonian-ruled world, we should learn new things, have novel experiences, do new things, go to new places, meet new people, and engage and explore anything and everything we are interested in. This applies to passive input as well, although consuming content demands active discernment, or it can lead to what our parents used to call brain rot. Joking aside, we do need to be choosy unless we are truly seeking mindless entertainment and distractions from real life, which is fine. But just remember that training data does matter in AI and humans. Now, with the manifold bulk and the thought pyramid or ladder, if you wish, in our mind, I would like to talk about an apparent contradiction to my entire theory. You might protest at this point and say, wait a minute. If diverse, rich, novel experiences do all that you claim and increase our higher mental functions and model of the universe, why are so many well-traveled, successful people still miserable, small-minded, oblivious, or malicious assholes? Good question, my observant friend. The answer, usually, is lack of integration. It is true that many people have had incredible, enviable, beautiful lives, and they may have had many meta-experiences or thoughts along the way. However, it is not enough to experience these things passively. For a good example, let's talk about psychedelics. Regardless of your opinion on the subject, you will definitely have a meta-experience if your dose of an entheogen is high enough. It might be terrible, amazing, scary, freeing, liberating, or traumatic, but it will be meta. However, what has been proven to help put it into context and use it in therapeutic settings is integration. A trained counselor or mental health worker sits with the person, then helps them afterward to maneuver through the emotions, memories, and hallucinations that psychedelics will produce or bring up. Sometimes they provide aftercare for long periods, months or years. However, the average psychonaut on their own may or may not try to integrate these experiences into their life going forward. Thus, the things they take away from the experience might be more superficial, less connected to existing manifolds, and less likely to be recirculated and referred to during meta-thought, let alone manifold thought or imagination. And this can apply to any experience that on the surface would seem to the average person as a life-changing event. Consider a trip to a new country that you know nothing about and/or have misconceptions or preconceptions about. The further from what you consider normal, the more you might expect the trip to change you. Remember, we are seeking novel and complex, right? Yet we all probably know people who have traveled, say, to Africa or South America. And during these trips, they encountered people with less security, money, food, infrastructure, freedom, democracy, etc. But upon their return, they seem to have learned nothing of substance. Or, worst case, they have adopted new prejudices, conspiracy theories, xenophobia, racism, or the narrowing of their mind in manifolds. I am not saying their conclusions are wrong for them. Still, without integration and consideration, they are more reactive than if treated as a meta-experience on a conscious, intentional level. So again, it is not enough to just gather sensory data. You must also consider it, ponder it, and look at the possible interconnectedness. But also be wary of drawing false connections, assumptions, etc. that might hinder and slow down the expansion of your manifold bulk, and thus the complexity of your mind. Do not let your mind set, as in your outlook setting like concrete, hardening into permanent, rigid manifolds. Try to stay mentally agile, spry, and fluid like water, which can be a solid, liquid, or gas, and thus flow anywhere and take on form and structure when the conditions are right. Water can move mountains, nourish life, store history, and escape under pressure. Now that we have discussed the importance of meta-experience integration into the manifold bulk, I want to give you one last word of caution. Sometimes when in a meta-thought discussion, a person will challenge the existence or expression of your free will. Let's say that they claim that you only make choices because they are predetermined, etc. You then reply that you could have chosen differently, and discussion or arguments ensue. However, this scenario injects what I will call a synthetic thought or question, or a synthetic meta-thought or question, into the middle of the actual, ongoing process of meta-thought and manifold use and free will. True or not, it then changes the outcome of the hypothetical, uninterrupted, natural manifold thought in the first step of the free will chain of events leading up to the end state. The synthetic thought did not arise from within your subconscious or conscious mind, and it explicitly challenges the present wavefront of time concerning your current meta-thought and manifold thought. I would say that such discussions should be understood for what they are: interruptions to the natural process of personal meta-thought or manifold thought, and not treated as proof of the existence or absence of free will. They are thought experiments outside of the process of using free will power to reach the first and subsequent decision nodes along the way to the finish line. And this can extend to larger social constructs, involving synthetic, scripted questions and scenarios and situations that are scripted intentionally to disprove free will, or show that expected and calculated probabilities can't be averaged or guaranteed. An extreme example of this behavior is making someone feel or believe that they must question everything, even the subconscious, repeated manifolds they use every second to simply move through the world and live life. An example is a pranking video. For instance, a YouTube prankster or a jackass-like show replacing an apple in a bowl of fruit with a plastic or wax apple to watch the reaction of the person try to eat a fake apple. Then they jump out from behind a bush or whatever and say, "See, you thought that was real, but we fooled you. You didn't spot the fake, bruh." Sure, stuff like this might be funny, entertaining, or harmless, but it is not an example of the failures of manifolds. Just like any form of social engineering or synthetic manipulation of events, it merely illustrates that humans can and will interfere with the execution of your free will if they can answer the three questions. Is it possible? Is it permissible? Is it bearable? And remember, they are asking these questions for their own benefit, not yours. Almost always, their interference is not about you, it is about them. And it is a reflection of their free will, thoughts, intent, goals, etc. So, do not suffer fools. Avoid them if you can, repel them if you must, and remain true to yourself. In other words, do not let the bastards get you down. So, to recap, today we defined what a manifold of the brain and mind are. Then we talked about how they are used to satisfy the hierarchy of needs and meta-needs. We defined and discussed manifold thought. Then we discussed the highest form of thought, imagination, and why it is so important. From there, we moved on to storing manifolds in the subconscious or manifold bulk. We also considered how integrating meta-experiences is essential to growing and learning from life-changing events. Lastly, we discussed how we might want to consider intrusions and challenges to executing free will by synthetic or scripted questions, scenarios, or actions performed by others. This was long, so thanks for hanging in there with me. I hope this video has clearly explained these concepts and invite any constructive discussion or criticism. Until next time, dream on, my friends, and go seize the day.